Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. For those of you new to this channel, I review all things movie and TV. So if you like what you hear, subscribe, share, and comment down below. So today we're talking about Amazon Prime's new series, Swarm. And to be honest, I still don't know what I watched. I don't know how to feel. I was a roller coaster of emotions. You know, like the series hit me. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. And it's one of those shows that you can come back to each time and find something new. Like in terms of replay value, it's amazing. So briefly, Swarm follows Andrea Green, a young girl who develops a fatal obsession with a pop star following the death of her best friend and foster sister, Marissa. The series, as I said before, is on Amazon Prime, and it starts with one of the most audacious intros I think I've ever seen. This is not a work of fiction. Any similarity to actual persons, living or dead, is intentional, right? Like, what a fantastic intro. It's basically saying this is exactly who and what you think it's about. So the story is actually 100% taken from real events, internet rumors, crimes that happened between 2016 and 2018. It then combines this information to create a narrative around this fictional character. So Andrea, contrary to what the show wants you to believe, is fictional, and she's not actually based on any real serial killer. She was kind of developed with extensive research into both real-world crime and actual serial killers, and it draws inspiration specifically from texts such as American Psycho and apparently The Kings of Comedy. The first episode takes place in April of 2016, I believe, and involves the release of fictional pop star Nijah's new work, Festival, which is an extremely Lemonade-esque album, right? And that's because it is a Lemonade-esque album. Dre is part of Nijah's dedicated fan base known as the Swarm. These killer bees are known to dox and harass anyone that says anything bad about Nijah. Dre's evolution from crazy fan to serial killer begins when her only friend in the world, Marissa, commits suicide. And this suicide is actually based on a real internet rumor started by a publication known as the Empire Herald, which is known actually as a hoax and satirical website that wrote that a woman had taken her own life after Beyoncé released Lemonade. The article quotes a supposed friend of Marissa Jackson's who discussed how obsessed this person was with Beyoncé, specifically her relationship to Jay-Z. And when she read that, you know, even the most powerful woman in the world could be cheated on, this sent her into despair and she committed suicide. So, you know, Marissa Jackson, of course, is not a real person, but people in Houston thought it was a real person, right? And you see that in the show with texts with references to Marissa Jackson, because during that time, people really thought such a thing happened. And at first, Dre's obsession with Nijah, it seems innocent enough, right? Like, there's something girlish about her in that first episode. There's even a scene when she's speaking with Marissa's boyfriend, and, you know, she's defending Nijah, right? She says something like, well, if Nijah ain't special, none of us are special. But there's nothing homicidal about it. Like, she wasn't giving me homicidal tendencies until after her friend Marissa died. And ironically, her obsession with Nijah is, you know, Nijah is very closely tied in to all these traumatic moments in her life. Not necessarily like the happiest moments in her life, right? Nijah's new album comes out the same night Marissa moves out. And this is really interesting because talk about bad timing and good timing. So Marissa moves out of frustration after having, you know, possibly lost her job. And, you know, they're kind of done with each other. And just at her lowest moment, Nijah comes in with this album. And it seems like Andrea has this other personality, you know, Andrea Fierce. And to celebrate the album, she goes out, she parties, she has the night of her life. And of course, while she was out, her friend Marissa was giving her frantic calls, you know, begging her to pick up the phone. And had she not been out and had let this album not drop, she probably would have been at home, you know, by the phone when Marissa called, right? So this incident, you know, her celebration of Nijah caused her to, you know, neglect her friend. Nijah is also closely tied into another traumatic moment, and we see this moment in that episode with Billie Eilish, when she recalls the first time she hears Nijah. And apparently the first time she remembers hearing Nijah is during this terrible incident when she stabbed a classmate during a sleepover party, causing her foster family to get rid of her. And it seems to me that Nijah's voice is loudest in Dre's head when she's going through some sort of like cruel transition from either being with someone to being alone. The trajectory of Dre's life from regular fan to obsessed fan is really interesting because her recollection of Nijah, you know, hearing her voice for the first time during the sleepover, you know, later we find out what the circumstances were. It's a bit odd because growing up, she had gone to Nijah concerts, right? And for some reason, I guess something happened during that time. Like, it wasn't like the first time she saw Nijah, she fell in love. Like, some transition happened where she went from just kind of regular fan to just obsessed, crazy fan. Actually, growing up, we get glimpses, but between the two of them, Marissa was the hardcore fan. Like, she was the one that, you know, when they used to go to these concerts, she was the one putting Nijah on a pedestal. And in a flashback scene, Dre is holding the camera and we see that Marissa is discussing like her feelings after the concert, and she's raving about what a goddess Nijah is, how she needs to be protected at all costs, how no one can dance and breathe like her, no one should exist like her, any of these things. And the whole time Dre is like filming Marissa, she doesn't seem to be like agreeing with her in any sort of like hype way, right? I think at one point she even says, yeah, she's an amazing woman, before actually being cut off by Marissa and correcting her, right? So Marissa calls her a god. So that's where she started to develop this, I think, obsession. You know, as the series goes on, it's very clear that Dre's attachment to Nijah stems from her attachment to Marissa. You know, it's not so much Nijah she cares about. I think it's maintaining this bond and this connection she has with her sister for as long as possible, right? As their lives are growing and changing, she doesn't really want to like separate from her. Like, she wants to maintain this bond, and Nijah is a way of maintaining this bond. And we don't get much insight into Dre's life, but from what we know, she was a foster child taken in by adults who basically used her for a paycheck to get back on their feet, right? So the one opportunity she did seem to have to be part of a real family, you know, it started off with very ill and bad intentions. And the only glimpse we have into the real Dre, quote unquote, is this old recording of a talent show we get where she's being booed off stage for singing Redneck Woman. And, you know, people say, be yourself, but honestly, don't be yourself. And, you know, watching that recording, she was killing it, right? She clearly practiced, she clearly rehearsed, like, this is actually who she was. And I think she was using the song to express some type of trauma that she had been going through. And that type of music and the lyrics probably resonated with her, like, quite a bit. But all her classmates booed her. We find out that she'd been bullied relentlessly as a child. And so after that talent show, like, things changed, right? Like, who she was wasn't acceptable. And if she continued to be who she was going to be without anyone. And I suspect her decision to, like, this transition from kind of regular fan to obsessed fan, and this kind of latching on to Nijah, was a way of being accepted into a community, or at least feeling like she was part of the group, right? The girls she grew up with loved Nijah. Marissa loved Nijah. So she's like, okay, well, if I love Nijah, then they'll love me too. Like, there is that kind of like, I feel like that's kind of like the trajectory that she was taking. The problem with this is that, you know, her obsession kind of grows as the people around her are growing up. So the older she gets, she latches onto Nijah as a way of like preserving her bond with Marissa. But the problem is, as they get older, people have different priorities, interests change, you know, tastes change, right? Like, Marissa is a fan, but she's not as obsessed as she once was when they were going to these concerts together, right? And Marissa tries her best to keep that, but it gets increasingly like more difficult. Besides Marissa, Dre doesn't really have much of a community. So a part of her attachment to Nijah is also, again, a desperation to find community, which she does on Twitter. And at one point in the first episode, I think Marissa scolds her for maintaining a Twitter account for chatting with obsessed fans, right? And so, you know, she maintains this Twitter account because she doesn't really have anybody else to connect with. Like, she's very socially awkward. She doesn't really fit in. She's known as Marissa's sister. She doesn't really have all the relationships that she has is as a result of this relationship with Marissa, but she doesn't have anything for herself, right? Besides this Twitter, these crazy people on Twitter that, you know, she keeps in touch with. Marissa's death in that first episode, like the switch from this kind of girly, innocent to just this this nuclear bomb of emotions is interesting, because Dre is a young woman desperately looking for purpose, and it's getting increasingly hard for her to look for, like, she doesn't know what to do with herself, right? Like, Marissa is getting older, she's leaving, you know, her job is pretty much done, and she's kind of in limbo. She's not in school. She goes to work, she comes home, and the only thing keeping her together is her relationship with her sister and to Nijah. When Marissa leaves, it's really interesting because Nijah's album drops on the same day, and I think that gives her some sort of like hope, right? It keeps her emotions alive, like, oh, this will bring us back together again, you know, like Nijah is like this symbol for everything perfect, and you know, like, it's a sign that everything is going to be okay. And it's really interesting because it was actually a sign that nothing was going to be okay. You know, they totally subverted that. And the guilt that Dre feels when Marissa actually takes her own life, it causes a rupture. And I think in some ways she feels like she failed at being her sister, right? Like, all she had to do was be home and answer the call, and none of this would have happened. And it's sad because Dre is a very unreliable narrator, but from what we saw in that first episode, it seems like Marissa, like, she really cared for Dre. Now, whether or not that was a burden and whether or not that, you know, was weighing heavily on her, we're not really sure, but they acknowledged each other as sisters, because I think at one point, Marissa's boyfriend, you know, after trying to hit on Dre, says, you know, you guys, you don't look like sisters. You know, so Marissa never tells anybody that they're not sisters. Like, that's how they introduce themselves, as sisters. So I think their bond as sisters was really great. And I think Dre always took the position that I'm going to protect this person no matter what, right? Like, I'm going to love her till she dies. And so the fact that she wasn't there for that phone call, I think just like rips her apart. I think when Dre starts to kill people, it's a way of making herself like feel worthy. Like, okay, if I wasn't good enough to be her sister, at least I'll be good enough to be like a Nijah fan. Like, is that the vibe? And I think one of the best lines in this whole series is that, you know, death is equal. It happens to everyone. And she was explaining this to Billie Eilish's character at one point while she was like unknowingly telling on herself. And I think killing people restored some type of order inside of her. You know, she needs to feel worthy of something, right? Like, she needs to feel worthy. And I think the worthiness is like, you know, feeling like she was, like, I'm not even good enough to be this person's sister. Okay, and the only, I think, left is Nijah. So for her to show her love for Nijah, like, I gotta kill these people. Like, her love is so extreme. It's so misguided, but it's coming from like a good place, if that makes any sense. First part, I've divided my video into several parts. So if you want to know where this is going, just click the description box down below and you can kind of jump around. So who's your favorite artist? I pray that the day someone asks me this question, they're wearing merch, so I can know how to answer that. Like, that was so terrifying. It was the most unserious, serious question. Like, I wouldn't even know what to think. I'd be so annoyed. You know, that one social media influencer she killed, he was like, Twitter? Like, are you serious? Like, I think that would be my reaction. So Andrea's multiple personalities. There's a lot to unpack here. So Dre is an unreliable narrator. Like, she cannot be trusted to save her life. And a part of that has to do with the trauma that she suffered. She has a lot of emotions that she doesn't actually know how to articulate, nor was ever really given the tools, right? So her foster family adopted her as a paycheck. They didn't really adopt her as a child that needed healing, that needed all these things, right? Like, they kept her around almost as a pet for Marissa. And so she kind of went through life playing different roles, it seems, to make people happy, but it never worked, right? Like, the people around her were never happy with her, and the one person that was happy with her is dead. I think Nijah, like, anytime she's asked her opinion, she always speaks in Nijah quote, right? And Nijah is a way for her to communicate how she feels because she doesn't have the language, right? At one point, she tells Marissa's boyfriend, like, you know, Nijah is amazing. She knows what we're thinking, and she gives it a name, right? She's a goddess, right? So in other words, she doesn't know how to speak or like how to articulate the things she's feeling, but for some reason Nijah's words really resonate with her, so it's kind of a way for her to communicate what she can't. And as the series goes on, the line between reality and total imaginary, like this it becomes the Joker at some point where you're like, did this really happen? Like how like is this real life? The series is very clever. It tells you many times that Dre is an unreliable narrator. And I think one of the scenes that made me laugh in terms of this is when after she kills Khalid, she starts to work at the strip club. And you know, the first time we see her at the strip club, she's a terrible dancer, same. She doesn't know how to move. Like it's not great. And as soon as she commits murder, the next time she clocks in, she's really sexy, she knows how to dance. People are throwing money at her, so it seems like she's making bank. But then you find out she makes like a small stack of change. So again, I think killing was a way to like boost her confidence or like boost her self-worth. And you can kind of see that because there's these discrepancies where it's like, you were a terrible dancer yesterday and all of a sudden you're amazing, but you're making the same amount of money. So again, she's a very, very unreliable narrator. And again, I think she uses imagination to like elevate her sense of self. And so this killing thing, right? Like I think the first time she kills Khalid, it kind of makes sense. She's angry, she's not allowed to mourn her friend, and she wants someone to pay for this. And it was like a switch that went off in her head. Like she killed him so, like I remember watching that and I was like, what just happened? Like I was actually very confused. I was like, is that what we're doing? Like it was just like bam. And once she's done killing him, it's almost like multiple personality syndrome. Like she's disgusted, she's screaming, she acts like she walked in on a dead body. Not, you know, she wasn't reacting like someone who had killed someone. And then her reaction was to open the fridge and start eating a bunch of food, you know, to basically stop screaming in horror. And her instinct to eat after every murder, or just to eat, period, like intensifies as the series goes on. And the correlation between food and murder is actually done quite intentionally because the writers of the show did extensive research on serial killers. And there's always some weird quirk that they have or some weirdness. And they found that, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer worked at a chocolate factory and they're like 90% sure he disposed of bodies in chocolate. So shout out to Jeffrey Dahmer. And the Night Stalker would actually break into people's homes and go through their refrigerator. So this correlation between food and her killing is kind of done to build her profile as a serial killer. That's a lot of it. And you know, on top of that, it's interesting. The more junk food she eats, like junk food has a lot of negative effects, right? In terms of memory, it can mess up your memory, fatigue, impulsiveness, right? Impatience. So a lot of the sort of agitation you start to see her like act out. A lot of the agitation that she has is a result of the food that she's eating also, right? It's starting to mess with her head and she just starts doing things impulsively. Like her mind is not clear. And on top of that, she's grieving. Each identity she creates is either there to cover her tracks or to defend Nijah, right? So she's kind of on the hunt to rid the world of anybody who insults Nijah. And I'm sure she's killed many people off screen. Like I was thinking, I'm like, how many people, like what's her kill count? And you know, there's so many hints that this is far worse than we can imagine. The blood in the backseat of the car, the multiple credit cards, the end of the series where she has a new car. You know, this must have come from somewhere, right? Like she's clearly killing people to get this stuff. And the only time we actually see her working is when she's at the strip club. Outside of that, we don't see her working. So we have to assume that she's committing hella crimes to get this done. And I think what disturbed me is in episode 6, the murders that come up. So episode 6 is the murder where we meet the detective, and it's also my favorite episode. And they're unpacking, you know, the serial killings, and the murders were not murders that we saw on screen, right? And I was racking my brain. I'm like, did she kill a Tiffany Long and a Dorothy Day? Like, I had to think about it because we didn't see any of these murders. So what that suggests is that the people that we've been watching her kill, it's like the tip of the iceberg. Like it just seems she's out here killing people left and right. And that really blew my mind. And so the only identity that seems to stabilize Dre is when she becomes Tony at the end. And I wonder how y'all felt about the ending, because up until the last episode, I actually was pretty neutral towards Andrea. Like, I didn't really care about the people she was killing. But the last episode makes it a point for us to be attached to Rashida, her partner. And so when she kills Rashida, I'm not gonna lie, I went from being like, oh, this is so crazy that she's killing all these people, to electric chair. Like, give her the electric chair. Like, my sympathies vanished. You know, like this almost. And I was like, no. Like, now she's gone too far. And I'm not really sure what that says about me, but you guys let me know, because they spend a lot of time, like in the short time that we see Rashida, we get very attached to her. She seemed very genuine, and I don't know if this is real or just a fantasy playing out in her head. Before she kills Rashida, it feels like Dre is in remission, like serial killer remission. And granted, she's still killing a lot of people to maintain this lifestyle, but it seems like she's slowly like chilling out. You know, like it seems like she wants to get off that track. And you know, watching her as Tony, you're thinking, maybe she finally found a stable identity to, you know, settle into. And it could have been that, or it could have been like BS. You know, I was sensing some Joker stuff here. Like, it was just too good to be true, to the point where you're like, this is kind of, the math ain't mathin'. Or Rashida's family is very similar to Marissa's. Like, very, very similar. So Rashida is a single daughter, like Marissa, beloved by her parents. They live in this beautiful house. And, you know, it seems like this is the type of family that she should have been adopted into. Right? Not Marissa's family, who treated her like a dog and locked her in an attic and just treated her as a paycheck. Right? Like, Rashida's family felt like the fantasy version of what she wished she would, you know, the type of life that she wished she was dropped off in. And, you know, the whole time she's with Rashida, like, you get the sense that she likes her more than she wants to kill her, because Rashida from that first night told her that she doesn't like Nijah. She doesn't F with her. Like, she's like, that's not for me. Not only is it not for me, I really don't even like her. But she doesn't kill her right away, which suggests that, like, there's, you know, maybe there's some hope. You know, maybe you can convince her to like Nijah. Like, I don't really know what she thought, but there was some type of vibe or healing energy coming from Rashida, where Dre just felt like, let me just keep her around for a bit. So everything's going well until the end. So when when Dre buys the tickets and presents them to Rashida, that part just tripped me out. Because Rashida, what we learn is that this issue with Nijah comes up time and time again. So Dre apparently has been trying to convince Rashida to like Nijah. This is the top 5 trending topics in their relationship, which is psychotic, which is absolute madness. But that says a lot about Rashida. She's a good person, right? She endured despite, you know, not necessarily having to. And so when she presents her with this ticket, I'm not gonna lie, I thought exactly what Rashida, like, are you dumb? Like, are you okay? Like, you know, she's struggling to keep these jobs. They live in her place. You know, they're like, again, it's kind of like a flashback to what happened with Marissa. Like, Rashida, Marissa, like, these are women in her lives that they have other concerns, right? Bills, boyfriend, like, they have all these concerns, but unfortunately, Dre is not in the mindset to think like that, right? And she's never been granted that space to think like that. So she's genuinely shook that Rashida didn't appreciate these tickets. Like, I was actually mad for Rashida when she pulled out these tickets. And, you know, I was kind of concerned, because it's like, okay, you've tried, it's clear that this is a top 5 trending topic. Rashida doesn't like Nijah. Why doesn't she just accept that? And also, why can't Dre just go to these concerts alone? You know, it's like, okay, fine, you could have maintained the bond and you could have just gone to the concerts by yourself. And I think it's one thing to escape into music. It's another thing to try to use like a person to escape. And concerts are probably one of the rare places where you could go by yourself and not feel alone. Right? Like, I've gone to many concerts by myself, and you know, it's fantastic. And it's one of the places where you can actually meet people and connect with them right away. Like, it depends on why you're there. If you're there for the music, because you're all kind of there for the same reasons. And there's 2 types of people. People that are kind of there for the music, and people that are there for the artist, if that makes sense, that they kind of discount everybody around them. So concerts and music, it's actually a nice way to form healthy bonds with people. But then you have to do this without forming this unhealthy attachment to the person on stage, because I'm telling you, some of the hottest people, some of the you know, the craziest vibes I ever got from people were from concerts, even festivals. You can go to a festival alone and suddenly you can just move around with a group of friends. Like, you can just vibe. I don't know, like, because it's like it's like this safe space. But in the case of Dre, the situation is totally different because these concerts are linked to memories of Marissa. So every time she goes to a Nijah concert, I think it's linked to Marissa. So it's very hard for her to separate that. And I feel like she was using Rashida as a replacement. You know, she's like, it's very, you know, it's not enough to have a new friend or a new lover, right? She needs to solidify this. She needs to make her new Marissa. Like, that's the vibe I was getting. And it's almost ritualistic and very serial killer-ish. Like, at the start of the series, she was buying tickets. And it seems like this is something she does a lot, right? Like, these tickets and this Nijah concert is going to keep our bond together. And Marissa was not interested in going to this concert. And, you know, as desperately as she tried, and Rashida is also not that interested, right? Like, the whole thing is very ritualistic and strange. It's like, okay, to make this official, we have to go to this concert. We have to have fun together, and this will ensure that we'll be together forever. Like, there's some weird ritualistic thing attached to all of this, and it's very misguided. It's coming from a place of love. But, you know, I think the reason that Dre was so triggered is because it just kind of goes to show that, you know, she, as much as she tries to connect with people, like, she can't, right? So with Marissa, they've grown apart. They grew apart to the point where they couldn't even really go to these concerts together and have fun, right? And there's a discrepancy, again, between how people see Dre and how they see her, right? And in this brief glimpse before she strangles her, that was so sad. Rashida actually says something interesting. So, like, do you go around with this look on your face, you know, needing help? So Rashida kind of took her on as like a charity case, it seems. Like, she loved her, but then there was also this, like, I need to take care of you energy. Whereas Dre, you know, she's seeing something different. So how people see Dre and how others see, it's just like night and day. And so she strangles her and she kills her and burns her body. You know, what's interesting is that when she was killing her, she couldn't even look at her. Right? She kind of like treats her like anybody else she's killed. Like, it's like a switch went off in her head. Right? It's like she has to decide between Rashida or being a Nijah fan. And she goes with Nijah. And so this whole like quest to meet Nijah is absolutely insane. And the first time Dre makes her way to Nijah, it's actually perfect. Like, it's almost perfect, right? You're like, okay, great. She's gonna hug her. It's gonna be great. Like, it was almost dream-esque. Like, she set it up in a way where she was in such close personal proximity to Nijah that you're like, maybe this will work out. You know, maybe she'll get the closure. Maybe she'll get that release that she needs. And she doesn't, right? She doesn't. In fact, she blacks out and she bites her. And apparently this is based on a real rumor of Sanaa Lathan biting Beyoncé at a concert. Like, I didn't even know that was a rumor until I started looking this up. And so the fact that she was in such close proximity to Nijah and still messed it up, the thing is, it only intensifies her need to meet her, right? She gets even more obsessed with getting close to her. Now, the way she tries to rationalize her reasons for going is really interesting, because her reason is like, okay, I have to go and apologize to Nijah for biting her face, you know, like, she needs to know I was really sorry. And in reality, it's like, Nijah probably doesn't want to talk to you. She probably doesn't know you. She she really kind of makes it like, I have to repair this relationship. Like, that's the crazy part. As soon as she bites Nijah and then she has this desire to see Nijah again, the way she kind of justifies it is as if they were friends that, if only I could fix it, you know, like, she needs to hear me out and then we'll be friends again. So very similar to Marissa, where, you know, they kind of had a falling out, but Nijah will make it all better. You know, like, I need to fix this. I need to, like, make sure everything is okay. And the bite isolates her from the swarm. And luckily for her, Twitter doesn't know who did it. But if they did, she wouldn't have a Twitter community either. I think this desire to meet Nijah, especially like any means necessary, right? She's acting impulsively. She's running people over. She's breaking into things. She's stabbing people. Like, things are happening. And I think it's a way of trying to speed up the grieving process. Like, she has this void and she wants it to go away. And somehow she thinks by being in proximity to Nijah, it'll make it go away. But it's not. It's only making it worse, right? It's not getting to the root cause of the problem, and she doesn't know how to attack that. And during this time, and you know, in terms of the grieving process, during this time, like, you know, a lot of people were grieving Marissa's death, right? But they've all found ways to move on. At one point, I think we bump into Dre's old boss, who even has a tattoo of Marissa, but still managed to have a child and move on with her life. And you could see the anger in Dre's voice, you know, like there's something that she's kind of pushed down. And a part of her anger, you know, like she wants to grieve, but she doesn't know how. And it's one thing to lose your friend in this way. It's another thing not even to be allowed to mourn, right? She was banned from the funeral. Her foster family treats her like she doesn't exist. And again, it's like she has nowhere to release this stress, right? And she's alone. And she doesn't know how not to be alone anymore. So we get to the ending, and the ending is super interesting because the only correlation between Dre's story and reality is during episode 6, when we're told that Andrea Green has been detained, and we get a clip of Dre running on stage. That's the last thing we see. And so the odds of her actually sitting backseat with Nijah is probably not the case. What's more likely to have happened is she was dragged off stage and she was sitting in the back of the police car, but her mind just went into fantasy, right? Like she uses fantasy to escape, and I think she just escaped. And you know, I think a lot of the peace of mind that you see at the end is because she feels like she fulfilled her promise, right? Like she doesn't know who she is, and the only person that kind of gave her promise was Marissa. And the last sort of thing she could latch on to is when Marissa said, you know, like, if anyone's crazy enough to meet Nijah, it's you. And so at the end, when she sees Marissa's face over Nijah, I think she feels like she fulfilled some purpose. You know, like she feels like, I was good enough to be your sister. You know, like, look at what I did. Like, this is a crazy, not only was I around Nijah once, I was around her twice, which proves that I am worthy, right? So there is this peace of mind of finally being caught and having, you know, seen Nijah in person. You know, and I think that's where that was coming from. This was a crazy series. I can't believe how, the acting was phenomenal. The ending is left up to you. You know, you guys let me know what you think of the ending, and also let me know what you think of Dre by the end. Did you sympathize? Like, I felt like a switch went off in my head. You know, very similar to Dre, where one minute I liked her, the next minute I was like, I'm kind of done. And then I went back to kind of liking her again. So you guys let me know what you think in the comments.